Hi guys, my name is Jason, and this is a short intro video to a series of videos that I will be doing, hopefully over the next couple of weeks. What I plan on doing is doing a lead guitar cover of each song off of the Jesus Culture album Come Away. So why am I doing this? Well, for starters, the album is pretty old. It came out in 2010, and throughout my guitar playing journey, I guess we'll call it, I've come back to this album several times and it's helped me become a better guitar player. So I've always enjoyed playing the album and getting better at figuring out what parts are being played and what effects, etc. The other reason is due to COVID, I've had lots of extra time to sit down and get even better. And so I thought it would be a good idea to create some videos for myself to remind me, whenever life gets busy, what it was that I played so I wouldn't forget and I could continue on that journey. So I could make the video, life gets busy, whatever, I could come back to it later and pick up and continue to learn and improve my craft. But then I was like, well, why don't I just put in a little more effort and then I can make them YouTube videos, and if someone wants them, they can have them. If not, no big deal. They're still there for me. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm doing the best I can to recreate the tones in the album of the lead guitarist, Jeffrey Cundy. I have a lot of the same equipment that we're going to go through in a second, and I try to play as best I can the positions and the notes and the lines that he plays. I know not everything is right or perfect. Again, that's the learning process. So if you see things that, maybe in the videos are not correct, go ahead and put it in the comments and let me know, and I can learn and we can learn together. Okay, so that's kind of the intro. Jeffrey Cundy, the lead guitarist, he primarily, based on the video series for this album, uses a guitar very similar to this. This is a Gretsch Duo Jet. This is a post Fender Duo Jet. And what that means is Fender bought Gretsch, I don't know when it was, 2014 or something, and they started remanufacturing their Duo Jets. And you can tell because the pre-Fender Duo Jets have more inlay in the fingerboard. Jeffrey has a pre-Fender Duo Jet. They play the same from what I've read, so that showed pretty much the same. He does in a couple songs use a Gretsch White Falcon, which I do not have. It's just a slightly bigger sound because it's a larger body and it's more hollow. He may actually grab that more when they do the recordings, because obviously in an album like this, you have the live bits, but they also go back to the studio and they record some. I don't know what guitars he used, but for the most part, I think it's this Duo Jet, and I only have the Duo Jet, so I'll be using that the whole time. Okay, next we'll talk a bit about my amp setup and how I get the tone out of my amps or my amp simulator. And then after that, we'll talk a bit about pedalboard. Okay, so let's start with my amp setup. I don't use traditional amps. I use what's called an amp modeler, and I'll show you the one that I use right here. It's made by a company called AXE-FX, and I have the 2XL Plus model. You can no longer buy this model. You have to purchase a 3 if you want to buy it brand new, but I got mine through Reverb for I think $1,200 or $1,300 used like 2 years ago. So people ask, well, why don't you use regular amps? And let me give you a couple of reasons why I think this is superior. First, cost. The 2 amps that I'm going to show you that I model, if I were to purchase them and maybe build some equipment to isolate them and mic them, etc., I'm looking at $6 or $7 grand, just for the amps and the equipment, not including my time to build the boxes or whatever I'm going to need to isolate them and get good recordings. So cost is number one. Number two, it allows me the ability to play anytime, anywhere. I don't have to worry about waking up the neighbors or bothering my wife while she's trying to watch TV or the kids or whatever. I can just play it through my headphones at full volume and not have to worry about having the amps on. And then 3, for me, and I have experience using this through church, and that's really what got me
hooked on this AXE-FX is 97, 98, 99% of the time, this is going to produce a better sound than 2 amps. And here's why. For most worship artists, we don't have the luxury of going into church several hours before we have a service, finding a good place to put our amps, a good way to mic them, working with the sound technician to get the proper responses and getting them EQ'd, etc., to get that really great amp sound. We also don't have recording equipment or millions and millions of dollars of PA system equipment to really maximize real amps. So with this, you can walk in, plug in, and it's going to be the same sound every single time. A little bit of EQ from your front of house or your sound technician, whatever, and you go. For me, that's way better than the variety of sounds you get by taking your own real amps into the worship setting. Sometimes they'll maybe be 40% of what you want or 70%. Maybe sometimes you can get 70 or 80 or even 90%, but this is going to get you 98, 99% of the tone you want very easily. And for me, compared to the other two things I just told you about cost and at-home use, it's just superior, and I really love it, even though I was very critical when I first heard about it and saw people buying it. So that is the system that I use. They have this really cool app called Axe Edit that you can control with your computer. You can control the module itself, and let me walk you through the amps that I have set up. So starting with the first amp, I run 2 amps in stereo. The first one goes out the left channel. The second one goes out the right channel. And that gives you that stereo feel, and I have it in my soundboard, which I'll cover in a second. I have those two panned all the way to left and right, so it gives you that big guitar sound. So Jeffrey in this album, from what I read and remember, he uses 2 amps. He uses his Bad Catz Luca, which is an amp that he designed with the Bad Catz company and named it after his son. And then he uses a Jackson Ampworks Britain. It's been a couple different models that he has. I don't know exactly which one he used on this album, but this is kind of what I think he used based on what I was reading on this album. So let me kind of go through some of those settings with you so you kind of see how I built it. So starting with the Luca, the AXE-FX system has many different types of amps or replicas of popular amps in there. So you can start like I did with this Class A 30 watt, which is a AC30 replica, a 30 watt AC30. And you can kind of see my basic settings here. I did play a lot with the EQ and some of the amp knobs, but a lot of the settings inside of AXE-FX I didn't really touch. I do have to level the amps left to right a little bit. So you see here I'm at -2 dBs for this one, and again it's panned all the way to the left. For this JC tone, Jeffrey really has a lot of amp presence, more so than a lot of other worship artists do. So you'll see this amp is pretty hot, and when you hear me play them in the other videos, they're pretty hot and they have a lot of presence. I do use this setup for other worship artists. I just bring that down a bit, the input drive, so there's not as much drive going into the amp. I still have that good tone, but I just don't have the breakup that is set up here. Okay, so let me go through real quick the settings, some of the settings that I've chosen. The preamp tube setup, similar to the Luca, it's a 12A X7A. Let me go to the power amp. The power amp is an EL34. Again, I don't mess with many of the settings here. And then let me go to the cab. So the cab here is a single speaker, and I purchased this cab pack from a company called Redwires, and they have they kind of baseline several different types of speakers and cabs and give you these responses that you can then import into AXE-FX. This one here is an AC30 Blues speaker setup. I chose the SM57, which is what Jeffrey uses, microphone, and then I have it placed 1 inch off the surface right near the cone. I can't remember if this is on the cone or right next to the cone, but either way. And again, you can select all these you want. I have these all loaded in here, so you have lots of different options. Okay, and then down here, again, I chose the 57 Dynamic, which is their Axe-FX's version of the SM57. Okay, let's go to the other amp. The other amp, a second amp, which is panned completely right, and then I have it mixed at minus 10 dB. That is the Jackson Ampworks Britain. Again, I'm not sure which one Jeffrey actually uses for this album, and to be honest, looking back at my notes, I have it set up a little different than how they build them now, so I don't know if they changed something or what, but I like how it responds, so I'm going to leave it and not update it. But I chose for this one this Boutique amp, Amp2 Boutique 1. It seemed to be as close to the Jackson Ampworks from Axe-FX that I could get as a baseline, and then I kind of went and played with it to get it right. So you can see my settings here for all the amp modes. Let's go to preamp. Preamp is an EF86. Power amp, I have it set to EL34. They now have EL84s. Again, I don't know why I did this, but I'm going to leave it because I like the way it sounds. And then let's go to the cab. So for this cab pack, I actually purchased the greenback pack from the manufacturer, from Celestion, if I'm saying that right. Celestion doesn't do what Redwires does, which is gives you various mic placements and distances. They kind of give you a bunch of different like tonal responses. So for this one, I've got it set to dark, SM57 dark. You can do different mics and stuff, but I have it set to SM57 dark. And again, the 57 dynamic is the Axe-FX mic. Okay, and then finally for the graphic equalizer, it's pretty flat, a little bit of highs, a touch in some areas of mids pulled out, but pretty standard overall. So my pedal chain goes from my guitar into my pedal board, which we'll cover in a second. Out of my pedal board is stereo into the Axe-FX, so I can get the stereo effects from my stereo pedals into the left and right channels of the Axe-FX, and then out of the Axe-FX into my mini soundboard, also stereo. So I have a left and right channel, and I'll show you my mini stereo board. Sorry about that. It's a Behringer 502, and you can see here I have my system going into channels 2, 3, and 4, 5, and I also have those pretty panned left and right, so in my headphones I get that full stereo sound. Okay, let's go next to the pedal board.
Okay, so let's take a couple minutes to look at my pedal board. If you are familiar with Jeffrey Cundy's pedals and how he puts his pedal boards together, you'll definitely see some familiar faces, but you'll probably also see a couple of different pedals. Every pedal board's different, everyone's preference is different. Even though there are a few major differences in my pedal board compared to what he had for the Come Away album, I still have the signature stuff, which is compression, Little Green Wonder, and reverb and delay, basic reverb and delay. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to create the tones and how the pedals are set up. Jeffrey Cundy does a much better job of that in his Guitar Institute workshop. I think you can purchase the tone class separately from all the other stuff. I don't think it's too expensive. So I would, if you really want to learn how to get the tone exactly, I would go to the Guitar Institute and use that. You can copy my pedal settings as you see here to get you started, as well as the amp settings as well. I will try and put more details of the Big Sky and timeline settings in the videos as the song goes, so you kind of know where my settings for those are at. So I won't cover those settings here. You can't see them anyways, but I will try and put them in the other videos as I go through. So let's start with my signal. We'll follow the signal chain. Coming into the pedal board right here, underneath the Walrus Audio Deep 6 is my signal from my DuoJet. That plugs into the bottom of my board into a little pedal called the JHS Little Black Buffer. And the purpose of that pedal, as best as I can tell, is to keep the resistance of your pedal chain
consistent so that your output is always the same regardless of which pedals you're pumping your signal through. I don't know if it makes as much of a difference now that I have this DPC looper. Before I just had all my pedals chained together, but Jeffrey has it on his pedal boards, and so I kept it. Underneath, for power, before we get to the rest of the pedal board, over here on the left you can kind of see it peeking through, is the Voodoo Labs Power 2 Plus, and then under here is the Strymon Zuma. So those are my two power sources. Back to the pedal chain, signal chain, into the JHS Little Black Buffer, into the Walrus Deep 6. This is a great compression pedal. Jeffrey uses this. I had the Keeley 4 knob for like a month. I didn't really like it, so I took it back and got this because that's what Jeffrey had, and I really like it. It's a great pedal. Out of the Deep 6, you can see the settings there. Out of the Deep 6, I go right into the DPC 5 Gen 3 from Disaster Area. This is a great, pretty affordable looper, MIDI controller, and tap tempo pedal. Jeffrey doesn't use this. He uses a Mastermind PVC. I don't know which model, but those are a lot more expensive. It can do a lot more than this pedal can do, and I just didn't need that. When I was doing my pedal board over, I was trying to stay with the current structure that I have and not grow. I wanted to stay in this footprint. So I went with this Disaster Area DPC 5. So how that works, there's lots of videos online about how to set it up and how to switch it through, but I basically am able to set all of my pedals up either through the looper, which I have channel 1 for Little Green Wonder, channel 2 for the Bondi FX Breaker, channel 3 for the 1981 DRV, channel 4 for the Old Blood Noise Reflector, and then I have an aux that I can put any other pedal I want over here, and right now I've got the Micro Pog from Electro Harmonix. It's also a 4-pedal MIDI controller. So 1, 2, 3, 4 my MIDI controllers, and then it's also tap tempo, so I can tap in tempo, and it will send it to all of the pedals on MIDI that care about tempo. So let's talk now a bit about the different pedals that I have. So the staple, I think, of Jeffrey Cundy Tone is DuoJet, Little Green Wonder, his stereo amp setup that we already covered, and then some basic reverb and delay that he gets from the Strymon pedals mostly. That's his signature tone to me, and so a lot of what you'll hear me play is just that. I will mix, and compression. Forget about compression. The other pedals I will mix in, and he does too, but a lot of times, I'd say 50 or 60% of the time, that's the setup. So moving on from the Little Green Wonder, let's go next to the Bondi FX Breakers. This is a newer pedal for Jeffrey. He uses not the Breakers actually, but the Bondi FX Del Mar, which is the old version of the Breakers. But he doesn't use either one of these on his older albums. He uses a Walrus Audio Voyager. I do have that pedal. I keep the Breakers on here because I like it better. I think it pairs better with the DuoJet. I think it's more complementary to the Little Green Wonder, and I think it just overall is a better pedal than the Voyager. If you really wanted that signature sound, again, it's really close with the Breakers. You could go with the Voyager, but I like this one better, so I kept it. So that's my second stage drive, which I use for solos, and then the third one, which I use to really jump out into the mix and get that really big, crazy tone that Jeffrey gets sometimes on the album. I have the 1981 DRV. Jeffrey uses a Keeley modded Rat. The 1981 is a Rat type pedal. It's not exactly the same, but it's very close. And again, I wanted to try this 1981 pedal out, so I got that instead of a Rat. Okay, the Chase Bliss pedals, the Dark World and the Gravitas you see there, I think Jeffrey has used the Gravitas. He didn't use them for Come Away because they're rather new to the market. I don't think I've ever seen him use the Dark World, but I wanted to really try out some Chase Bliss stuff because I think they're doing some really cool things with pedals. And so when I redid my board, I made sure to include these two. I will use the Gravitas and the Dark World a bit for swelling to give it some more texture. Jeffrey did have on the Come Away album, or near the Come Away album, a tremolo pedal. He had the Tapa World by a company called Kuzak, I think it's called. It wouldn't fit on my pedal board because it's a bigger pedal, and I like the reflector better. I'm sorry, the Gravitas better. So I chose the Gravitas over what he used in the album. And then I don't know what chorus pedal he used. I don't know if he was using chorus at that time, but he is now using this Old Blood Noise, or has used it a couple times, and it's a really cool pedal, so I use that pedal on occasion. And then finally, the Strymon pedals. Jeffrey at one point had the Blue Sky, which is the smaller, less capable version of the Big Sky, though it does have the basic Hall plate spring room settings that he uses. It doesn't have all the other stuff, so it's basically the same thing. This just has more features, which I don't use for the album. And then he did not, I don't think at the time, had the Strymon Timeline. I think he had the Eventide Time Factor. I don't know if you can tell the difference between the two. I've never played the Time Factor, but I had the Timeline, and I like it a lot better than the videos I've seen of the Eventide, so that's why I chose it. I have a Sonic Research tuner down here. I chose that because it fit. It has an out from the DPC-5. All my cables are custom fit Disaster Area cables, except for some of the ones that are running the straight chain. Those are a little more expensive. And then those are Mogami cables. And then these here are Disaster Area MIDI cables that you can see going to the Timeline, or from the Timeline to the Big Sky. And then special Chase Bliss audio cables made by Disaster Area that are coming out of the DPC into each of the Chase Bliss pedals. They take a slightly different MIDI control type. So that's about it with the pedal board. I have it all set up in here so that as I move up on this, I can move up per song, and then it'll change all the settings in the pedal board, including the names of the songs, to my right settings. And then these 1, 2, 3, 4, those are my different presets within that song, so I can easily tap from a chorus to a bridge, or a bridge to a solo, or a solo to a vamp or a swell very quickly. And this choice was not so much for this album, but just more for live sets and doing worship. It's just so much easier to tap something once and be ready for the next song. Before, I was always like pulling my volume, then getting ready, and then kind of easing my volume back in as I was tapping around to get ready. And that's just not what you want to do. You really want to go right into it. So that's what I have. And then volume pedal, Ernie Ball Jr. with the JHS Power Mod. I think Kunde uses a little more fancy pedal now. It's just a volume pedal, so they're all about the same in my opinion. So get what you like and go from there. Okay, that's about it for pedals. We covered my pedal board. We covered my amp setup. Obviously the guitar, that's pretty straightforward. This is what I use, guys, to recreate all of these videos. There's nothing here that I'm going to add in that you haven't already seen. So those are my basic setups. Hope you enjoyed the video, and hope you enjoy all the other covers as I go through and do this really cool album by Jesus Culture. Thanks.